she's not slept over 48 hours. There's just not enough.
3 and 4-year-olds are 5 times more likely to receive early childhood education than the poor.
And we hope that this will allow people who just have no way of accessing to
911, what's your emergency?
Hello, there's a kid in the school with guns in his head. He just started shooting. We don't know where to go.
Calm down, sir.
2018 journalist and critic was killed after entering a concert.
Readers turning to independent media for information during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Systems and species are shrinking.
3/4 of the land-based environment and about 66%
It allowed us to trace and monitor the COVID-19 pandemic. Next generation sequencing were able to generate a new report.
We frequently travel on those roads. The damage done and
fight of our lives. The United Nations Secretary General has called for a ceasefire in countries locked down.
Hello, this is Adam Carroll from Justice for All, and welcome to another show of UN This Week. I wanted to just mention the first video that you were just watching. UNESCO has launched The Next Normal, a global campaign about the world before and during the COVID-19 pandemic. Our previous reality cannot be considered normal any longer. Now is the time to make a change. It all starts with education, science, culture, and information, they say. Building it up better, or building it back better, is a fine theme for the UN during the current health crisis. Meanwhile, the US struggles against the International Criminal Court, defunds the WHO, World Health Organization, and UNESCO, which made the video, struggles to maintain an embargo against Iran, and more. On a more hopeful note, this afternoon, the 7th of July, the Security Council will announce the results of a vote on a draft resolution authorizing cross-border and cross-line humanitarian access in Syria. Today is an open debate in the Security Council on peacekeeping and human rights, and tomorrow there will be attention paid to the crisis in Libya. Again, unfortunately, this spring, the United States declined to support an Algerian candidate for the post of special representative in Libya, leaving an American, Stephanie Williams, the acting head of the UN mission there months later as the conflict continues to drag on. I was briefly highlighting some of the many disappointments and concerns about US policies at the UN because we have with us today a former US diplomat who might be able to correct or better inform us. It is a pleasure to have a former member of the deep state on the show. Bruce Knotts is a former US diplomat and current head of Unitarian Universalist UN office. He was Peace Corps volunteer in Ethiopia, worked for Raytheon in Saudi Arabia. That's quite a jump. And on a World Bank contract in Somalia before he joined the State Department as a US diplomat in 1984. Bruce has had diplomatic assignments in Greece, Zambia, India, Pakistan, Kenya, Sudan, Cote d'Ivoire, and the Gambia, where he served as Deputy Chief of Mission. He's also been Regional Refugee Coordinator for West Africa. Bruce has also observed UN peacekeeping operations in Sierra Leone. Bruce Knotts retired from the Foreign Service over 10 years ago and began directing the Unitarian Universalist United Nations office in 2008. He founded faith-based advocacy for sexual orientation, gender identity, human rights at the United Nations, and continues to advocate for the rights of women, indigenous peoples, and for sustainable development in moral terms of faith and values. I'll leave it there, but perhaps we'll get into speaking about some of the work on the many committees and the real depth of immersion in the UN as we move forward. So again, welcome to the show, Bruce.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and I respect your work and your show as well.
Well, thank you. We're just getting off the ground with this show, but our work, as you know, is very much uphill battle. Along with you all, we're really taking on some difficult human rights issues. And I did want to give a shout out to the Unitarian Universalists who have funded some important programs that work on the Rohingya issues. So that's very much appreciated.
Our service committee takes that very seriously and very much wants to help. It's a heartbreaking situation, and I've learned much about that situation from you. So thank you for your raising people's awareness and knowledge about the Rohingya at the United Nations and beyond. I really respect that.
Well, thank you. So I did want to ask first, though, about your career post-Peace Corps. I was in the Peace Corps too, as you may remember, in Morocco, just not around the same time, more or less, from 1980 to 82. I think you finished in 80, right?
I finished Peace Corps in 75.
Oh, okay.
A little bit older than you, probably.
Just maybe a touch, but so after Peace Corps, how did you manage the jump to Raytheon? That's quite exotic.
Well, I needed a job, and I had been a teacher, a Peace Corps teacher, and I saw jobs as teaching in Saudi Arabia, and they really didn't tell us that the ad that I answered didn't really tell us much about who we were teaching or what it was about. It was just basically English teaching. So I applied and I got the job. What we were teaching were recruits into the Saudi army. And they were learning how to, first of all, they had to learn English. And then after they learned English, they learned how to operate the Hawk missile system, which is an anti-aircraft missile system that was manufactured by Raytheon. So I did that for 4.5 years, and that paid for my master's degree. So I was able pretty much to pay cash for my master's degree. So that's what I did. And I enjoyed the teaching. I enjoyed talking to the students and learning more about Saudi culture and such, you know, but it was part of the military industrial complex. So I spent some time there, so have some insights into it.
Yeah, interesting insider view. And with living in Saudi at that time, I don't know the living conditions, if you were in some sort of expat compounds, if there were limitations on fraternizing, how that was.
I had Saudi friends. We were in an expat compound, so we were pretty much isolated in that way, but I had quite a few Saudi friends and got to get a feel for Saudi culture. I basically took my Peace Corps experience with me, and you know, as a Peace Corps volunteer, I did everything I could to learn the local culture and language, and I did the same when I was in Saudi Arabia. Many of my colleagues didn't. They just stayed on the compound and, you know, acted like Americans all the time. And I really wanted to get to know Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is probably the one country that I've been to where it was very hard to build friendships beyond a certain level. I mean, you could have sort of casual friendships, but kind of the deeper, lasting friendships that I've been able to forge in other countries, I was not able to forge in Saudi Arabia. So it was more or less at kind of a superficial level.
It is interesting living immersed in another culture, and this is also speaks to the Peace Corps experience, that you do come up against these invisible walls that may or may not have doors, or may have different principles that you're used to, because we all do that. All our cultures create taboos and borders, but sometimes it's very difficult to figure out. So you did move on to many other postings and many other Muslim countries. In fact, I was wondering if you could speak about some of that experience living in Muslim countries as a diplomat.
So as I mentioned, when I was in Saudi Arabia, where I wasn't a diplomat, that was probably my first and deepest experience with the Muslim world, for the Islamic world. Probably the next country that impacted me a great deal was Pakistan. And I remember going to a wedding, and Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan was singing, and very famous musician. I think he won an Academy Award for his music at one point. And I knew Urdu somewhat, but I couldn't follow the lyrics of the song very well. So there was a Pakistani translating the lyrics for me. And it was all about Allah's love for us and our love for Allah. And it was very romantic, even, I would have to say. And I asked this Pakistani who was translating for me, I said, "What is this?" He said, "This is the loving Islam that you don't know anything about." And I took that as a challenge. I thought, okay, there's something I don't know, I have to learn. And basically, this is Sufi Islam, which is very popular throughout Pakistan and South Asia. And I read every Sufi text I could get. I started with Idris Shah and went to Rumi and many other authors. My next posting was in Khartoum, Sudan. And when I got to the embassy there, I said to the local employees, I said, "Do you have any Sufis here?" And they kind of rolled their eyes and they said, "We've got tons of Sufis here," you know. So I got introduced to a couple of Sufi tariqas there. And I was just totally captivated by their hospitality and their kindness. They answered all my questions, and I asked lots of questions about Islam. And after, at some point, they said, "Well, you know about Islam enough, you should say your Shahada and become a Muslim." And I said, "I still have some doubts." And they said, "Everybody has doubts." So I actually went ahead and I said my Shahada right before Ramadan in Khartoum. And I fasted Ramadan. I started praying 5 times a day. I did Taraweeh. I did all the pillars of Islam, including the Hajj to Mecca, which I did later in the same year. And I was very impressed by everything that I experienced. In Africa, later in West Africa, I went to mosque regularly there and very impressed by the faith. I have to say I was less impressed when I got back here to the United States. And you've mentioned that I've worked on sexual orientation, gender identity, human rights, and that was not a subject that came up during 7 years as a Muslim in Africa. And yet here in the United States, I found many imams who basically seemed to be saying that Islam was better than Christianity because they were more homophobic than the Christians were. And being a gay man, that didn't sit too well with me. And so I sort of drifted away. I consider myself to be a Muslim. I believe in the teachings. I believe in the oneness of God, and that Muhammad is the prophet of Allah. But I have to admit that I'm not a very practicing Muslim at this time.
Well, I think God is greater than the religions that we know. Revelation is just so beyond, the mundane level that we understand things as. But I guess this journey that you're on, it has taken into Unitarian spaces, and I think it's fascinating that Unitarians include Muslims, and that it's so flexible. Maybe not in all ways. I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Well, what most people don't realize that there was a great conflict in the first 100 years after the death of Jesus. And there were strong voices at the time that said that Jesus came to earth with a message from Allah, from God, but he was not God himself. And that was a matter of some great contention within the church for the first 1,000 years of Christianity, to be honest. Obviously, the Trinitarians won, and there was developed this doctrine of the Trinity. It was first articulated formally at the Council of Nicaea in about 350 AD. But there was always a voice within Christianity that said, yes, we follow the teachings of Jesus, but we don't worship Jesus. And that remains in the Unitarian faith, is that we follow the teachings of Jesus. We also follow the teachings of other prophets, but we don't see any other God other than a Unitarian God. At least that's our traditional belief. We've become a religion where we accept all kinds of faiths, and so you can believe that, or you can believe basically where your heart leads you. And it gives me the freedom to explore religion, including Islam, Buddhism, other faiths, and not have to worry about being excommunicated.
Well, we don't have any writ of excommunication in the drawer here. But as far as working on human rights, including LGBT issues, I mean, I noticed on the website, on your website, there was a link to a case in Tunisia. Let me see where it is. It was some young men had launched a legal case, one against the other, and instead of resolving that, the Tunisian police arrested them both for sodomy and have sentenced them to 2 years. And so these concerns, I know, are widely shared at the UN as being human rights issues that hurt everyone and are unjust. And I noticed that on July 1st, the Secretary General's spokesman praised Gabon in Africa for decriminalizing homosexuality. So the idea that the state should be criminalizing very personal conduct rather than leaving it to the individual to find their way. These are important issues even at the UN, or maybe especially at the UN. But what do you all do on this issue at the Unitarian Universalist Office?
Well, our bottom line has been do no harm. And people can argue about whether it's right or wrong to, your sexual orientation. But as we're having this discussion within our faith or in secular spaces, it's important not to harm people. And we can debate what we want to debate, but we shouldn't be harming people. If you consider any congregation anywhere, it might be a congregation of Muslims in a mosque, or it might be a congregation of Christians in a church, or wherever that might be, you know there are sinners in that congregation. Some people are cheating their customers. Some people are cheating on their taxes. Some people are committing adultery with, outside of their marriage. And generally speaking, we just ask these people to be better people, but we don't bring them before the court. But it's something about same-sex relationships that has caught, people's imagination, and they feel that they must go after these people, and it becomes something of a national religious identity that they have to persecute gay people, and that somehow makes them more religious by doing that. I'm sorry about the Tunisian case. I read about it. I think it's very sad. Tunisia is a better country than that. It's been through quite a bit itself in its own history, and it's trying to be a democracy. The Gambia, where I was the deputy chief of mission, and it's a predominantly Muslim country, the legislature there, the National Assembly, is also debating a law to decriminalize homosexuality. I am, of course, I support that. I hope it happens. If it doesn't, I think it will come up again. And this isn't just Muslims. I mean, Uganda, of course, tried to pass a kill the gays bill and then didn't. That did not pass in Uganda. So there's a great deal of hostility within both the Christian world and the Muslim world against people because of their sexual orientation. Here's my take on this, and I am not an Islamic scholar, but I've done considerable reading. There's a hadith, a Sahih hadith. It's in Muslim, and it's in the collection of hadiths, and it's usually referred to in English as the hadith of the effeminate man. And it's about an effeminate man in Medina when Muhammad was running, was the king or the ruler of Medina. And some women came to him and said, this effeminate man, when we are dressing and undressing, he laughs at us and he makes fun of us. And the way I like to tell this story is the Prophet of Allah had many options open to him. He could have said, off with his head. Or he could have said, banish him from our community. He could have said anything. What the Prophet of Allah said, he said, don't take your clothes off or put your clothes on in front of this man. And if that is the wisdom of the Holy Prophet of Allah vis-a-vis an effeminate man, who I take to be probably a gay man, if that's the wisdom of the Prophet, who are we as followers of the Prophet to be any more harsh than he was? And I'll give you one other hadith. And it's not about homosexuality, but as Muslims, we know that we are to pray for the dead. So there was a companion of the Prophet, and he said, I am going to go pray for our brother who has passed away and is buried. And his companion said to him, you know, this guy was an alcoholic. He drank. He was an alcoholic. And the Prophet said, yes, I know. But you know, when you got up in the morning to say your Fajr prayers, this was the guy who prepared the water for you to do your ablutions, for you to do your wudu. And I am going to go pray. And so again, the Prophet of Allah showed his character. He was willing to overlook the sin and see the man, and he went to go pray for his companion.
Well, mashallah, that's radical and deep compassion underlies a lot of human rights work and a lot of good religious practice. So I'm just going to take a quick break for station identification. So we are with Justice for All, an NGO that is accredited at the UN with the Department of Global Communications. So I hope that people will join us. So Bruce, you guys are accredited not only with the Department of Global Communications, but with ECOSOC. And I think that you are very active on many committees. I have to look them up. The NGO Committee on Human Rights, as I know, you're the co-chair. NGO Committee on Disarmament, Peace and Security. NGO Committee on Sustainable Development, because I know you work on climate change and climate justice, and you're on the governing board of that. NGO Committee on Migration, NGO Committee on Freedom of Religion or Belief, and then there are other groups as well. So it's great. This NGO universe where there are committees and really diverse people, smart people coming together and collectively tilting at the windmill of the Security Council or other nation states. What is your perspective at this point, especially as we have been in this pandemic? What do you think is most effective for the NGO community working on many of these program areas?
One committee you didn't mention, and I just had a meeting with the South African ambassador yesterday, is the NGO Committee on the Security Council. And I enjoy our meetings with the members of the Security Council very much. This is a very tough time. It's a tough time for the UN. It's a tough time for the world. What I try to be an optimist, and often when you face a real tragedy, as we're facing now with this pandemic, it sometimes creates opportunities for change. And we need to seize this opportunity and change things for the better. I often compare the United Nations with the League of Nations, which lasted for 20 years after the First World War and failed. And the United Nations is now turning 75, and it's not perfect, and it has had its failures, but it's still there, and we have not had a World War III. So it has achieved its basic purpose. Kofi Annan, when he was Secretary General of the UN, said, I need the NGOs to push us in the directions we want to go. And that's true. The NGOs are there, and I think most of the people who work for the UN really want to do the best they can, but they must operate at the behest of the 193 member states. The NGOs are gadflies, informers, people that are pushing on human rights, on disarmament issues, on climate change. And we are able to push the UN and the member states and public opinion to do the right thing. And I believe it is the NGOs that has made the UN more effective than the League of Nations. It's not just government representatives, because if we were left to the devices of only government representatives, look at the governments around the world. There's not much to look at there. I mean, they claim to represent the people of their countries, and we know they don't. We also don't represent the people, but we all have constituencies, and we do represent our constituencies, and we do it at a more basic level. And so we bring that basic level of faith-based or secular or whatever issues we're working on, and we bring that to the UN. And you and I have both had meetings with member states, and we have raised issues with them that they didn't know about. We have been able to bring issues to them that they weren't not aware of. And by doing that, we push for a better world. It's long, hard work. I talk about the 3 Ps, which are patience, persistence, and professionalism. And we need to continue to work on issues. It doesn't happen quickly, but by continuing to push on issues. And I worked a lot on sexual orientation. I started in 2008, and I'm very proud of the fact that within 3 or 4 years, the UN had adopted policies, procedures, and programs that provided equal representation, equal rights for people regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity. So, you know, it's proof that we can succeed. You, in your work on the Rohingya, have done the same thing. The first time I heard the word Rohingya, I had no idea what it meant. You know, it was just a strange word to me. And it's through your activism and activism of your colleagues that you have brought this issue to the top rung of the work that we do at the UN. Everybody now knows about the Rohingya and trying to do something for them. But that's what we do at the UN. We bring issues to the fore, many issues that other people don't even know about. And we're able to bring it to people's consciousness and then push for some resolutions or for some action on it. And strangely enough, we've been successful. We actually make a difference.
It's good to also think of it in terms of a long game of changing the culture at the UN, bit by bit. I know on climate justice, there have been some policy changes in the UN building, which, you know, right now we can't get into, but, you know, in terms of not using one-use plastics and, you know, doing a lot more recycling. So all of these things begin to create new norms. And so the idea of building it back better it's a slogan, sure, but it's also a game plan if you can break it down into strategy. With your bringing in new groups, I know that you were helpful to the Progressive Muslim group to get in and be accredited. And in fact, seeing them there made me realize that, yes, our group could do that too. And so you've opened doors. And I think that's very important to strengthen community of the NGO world. So as far as, you know, some of the many challenges, and we don't want to get burned out just staring them and, you know, directly at the sun, but it's you know, last Thursday there was a new scandal of a video of peacekeepers in a van with prostitutes in Tel Aviv or something like that, and it was on video. So of course these days everything is on video. And becomes an issue, and perhaps rightly so. But there have been many scandals at the UN, and yet people know about the negatives out in the community, and they don't know about all the positive work that's being done. And so, you know, there's a legal and human rights architecture, but it needs to be implemented better, and people are working on that now. There are the international courts. There's all the humanitarian agencies. And I hope that as we have more shows, that we'll be having people on from all those sectors. And also, of course, the impacted communities. I mean, Yemen, that's so awful. And of course, now I don't know if Raytheon is still supplying the jet fighters to Saudi. But in Yemen, I think the COVID-19 death rate is also something like 40% because the medical supplies are not there. And so there are some real horrific disaster areas around the world, and I think that we all care about that. And we also care about the longer game of building it up better. So just as far as your plans for the next, say, 6 months, I was wondering what your office was planning to do.
One of the areas that I think we're going to be doubling down on is the militarization of the police. Of course, that's very applicable to the United States, where police are no longer guardians. They have military equipment, and they act in a very military fashion, targeting immigrants, targeting people of color, and you know, that's not what the police are supposed to be doing. And this also happens in other countries as well. So this is a fairly new initiative for us, but it's something we're definitely going to be talking about. In our meeting with the ambassador from South Africa, I raised the issue of the Black Lives Matter and the fact that the African Union, together with South Africa, pushed that issue at the Human Rights Council. And I asked him that needs to be a persistent push. And it's one thing that other countries can do for each other. And I think the African Union and that group of countries have pointed out the systemic racism against people of African descent, and they can stand up and push things at the UN in ways that an African American citizen can't. So countries can bring those issues to the fore. Yemen, you mentioned, is such a tragic situation. And it obviously is a proxy war between the United States and Iran, with Saudi Arabia being our proxy. It's innocent people suffering, children, women, children, old people who are starving to death. I believe it's one of the worst famines on Earth at the moment, and we're not doing enough for them. We're not even beginning to do enough for them. That should be something that for which we pay much more attention. It's a very tough time, and we're going to be tackling. Racism is top of our agenda, and all of its manifestations of systemic racism and bigotry, whether it's religious bigotry or whatever it might be. It's becoming worse. We think it's getting better, and it's not. It's getting worse around the world. We're seeing the rise of authoritarian governments, and we're seeing the rise of governments that do not want to cooperate on global problems. You mentioned in your lead-in the United States withdrawing from the World Health Organization, defunding it and withdrawing from it altogether in the middle of a global pandemic. That's just inexcusable.
At least there's a whole year before it takes effect. So there's a chance, if things go a certain way in November, that I guess that could be changed. But I mean, in short, there's hope, but it is shocking. And the U.S. decision to withdraw funding from UNESCO and many other, and to withdraw from Human Rights Council, very counter.
Withdraw funding for the Palestinian refugees, which the U.S. has funded that program for many years. No, it's we're in a very bad situation. Unfortunately, we're not alone. There are other authoritarian leaders in other countries which are just as bad, if not worse. And it's not just that they're despoiling their own countries and oppressing their own people, but their lack of willingness to cooperate with other countries on global pandemics, on climate change, on global migration, on disarmament issues, means that we can't get this work done. Because this is global work and it needs countries to cooperate together. That's what the United Nations is all about. And you're getting more and more countries that are just saying, no, we're not going to cooperate. We're not going to help other countries. We're going to America first. It's going to be, our country first and other countries be damned. And that to me feels like the 1930s. That feels like Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini and Francisco Franco and Tojo in Japan. I mean, that's not a good direction for the world to be going in.
No, it's not constructive. Well, as we wind up our show, we've just got a couple of minutes. I see your office has all kinds of things going on: Blue Ribbon congregations, Justice Awards, the Elaine Harvey International Justice Award, Every Child is Our Child, a program called Holding India, where you do a lot of work in India. Are there any particular programs that you would want to just mention or highlight before we break and end the show?
Well, in the lead-in, we have a Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, which is our service arm of the denomination, and they have been assisting the Rohingya. Their basic, what they try to do is to look for those areas that the larger NGOs are not hitting. So if Care International or Save the Children, or they're not hitting, they're not taking care of a certain group of people or a certain slice, then that's where we try to make a difference, and that's where we intervene, and that's been our policy for a long time.
Well, it's very much appreciated, and so is your leadership. And perhaps in a few months we can have you back on, see where we are at that point. Who knows? Maybe we'll all be meeting in person, though. I don't know. What are the 3 P's again? Patience,
Persistence, and professionalism.
there we go. All right. Well, thank you so much, Bruce. And and I think we'll break. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And stay tuned. Our show is Tuesdays and Thursdays at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Please join us. Put us on your calendar, and we'll see you next time.